Hello, I'm Tracy Nicholas, and welcome to Folkloring. I am a passionate folklore practitioner, and to me, folkloring is more than just a podcast. It's my commitment to help you connect with your roots and awaken the wisdom within you.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Folkloring. And today I'm here with author Jack LaFountain, who has been publishing since 2005. And we're going to talk about his books and how folklore plays into that. Now, Jack has done a lot of things in his life. He was in the Air Force and then he became an ordained minister. He was then a hospice chaplain and eventually became a registered nurse and now an author. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to it.
Well, before we start, I want to talk a little bit about how I've been folkloring lately. And so I have been making tinctures. I've been making a lot of different tinctures for different things because I've got all of my herbs dried and cleaned. And so that's really what I've been focusing on lately. How about you, Jack? Have you been folkloring lately?
Actually, the latest folklore I've done, I've been looking into a a creature called the Latiche,
Hmm.
which is it's a Cajun bit of folklore that is, and I really haven't drawn lines, and I don't know if there's any lines to drawn really uh, to be drawn between. It's a creature that is a combination of uh, unbaptized infants and alligators. Uh,
Wow.
some of the legends that I'm picking up talk about the Latish being a spirit that kind of controls the alligators, and other parts that I'm reading so far I pick up is that the Latish is part human, part alligator, sort of along the lines of the werewolf. It's a mixture of the two, and I'm still doing work on that for my latest book. But yeah, that's what I've been into lately.
Yeah, whether it's spirits or whether it's a combination, those are both terrifying. So,
Yeah, so yeah, they're both supposed to haunt the swamps and the bayou south of New Orleans. So
okay, all right, and again, a lot of scary stuff happens there.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
Okay, great. Well, why don't we start by having you tell listeners about yourself, and then we'll start talking about some of your books.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a Vietnam veteran, um, Air Force veteran. Um, I spent 7 years in the Air Force. After that, I became a an ordained minister, which I still am, and I still teach classes off and on.
Mhm.
I did a while with as a hospice chaplain, and I kind of really got into that. That's what led into my becoming a registered nurse. I wanted to do the part that I did as a minister, but then I wanted to do the hands-on part that I saw the nurses doing.
Mhm.
So I kind of yeah, I went to school to become a registered nurse and kind of blended the two. I did that for about 25 years until back surgery kind of made working in the ER not really possible. I
Okay,
mean, I could have stayed in nursing, but I couldn't have stayed in the ER after that.
sure.
I worked for a while. 12-hour shifts on the concrete floor just weren't happening for me.
Yeah, that's hard work. It's a lot of heavy lifting and that kind of thing. So I
Yeah,
can understand. And you get to a certain age, right? You don't want
yeah,
to stand all day.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I got kind of old enough where I said, I don't have to do this anymore. I like doing it, but I don't have to do it anymore.
yep. Yeah, I'm sure it's hard emotionally and physically. So I can
Yeah. Oh
completely
yeah.
understand that. So why did you then turn toward writing?
I had I kind of always remembered telling stories. I never really did a lot of writing. I I did it a bit in high school, um, but nothing, and even a little bit afterwards, but nothing I really wanted to show anybody.
Okay.
Uh, if you can, you kind of get that. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's nice for me to do, but I really don't want anybody to see it. It's not because it's not good enough. Of course, I after the service, I was kind of late going to college. And in my sophomore English class, um, we were assigned a to write a paper on the most interesting or most unusual place we ever ate.
Hmm.
And so I wrote a paper about a place in Okinawa where I went to eat, but I was in the service. And the message on the paper coming back to me was see me after class. I thought, wow, this doesn't sound good at all. And the instructor said, she said, I don't think you understood the assignment. This is supposed to be a real place. And, I said, I tell you with my hand up, this is a real place that I've been to. And it really is just like I described it. He said, well, okay. I believe I got an A on the paper. But then he wrote a note at the end of the paper said, your writing and your description of this place sounds a lot like the writing of a fellow named name just went disappeared from me, Gene Simmons. And he said, but and I had no idea who that was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I decided I'm going to look it up. He said the name of the book that he wrote is called "In God We Trust, All Others Pay Cash."
Okay.
So I looked up the book and I actually was going to buy the book, but before I bought the book, I saw I was watching TV. It was around Christmas time, and the movie A Christmas Story came on, and I was watching the credits at the end, and I said, "Oh, this story is from this author,
Ah,
and in God we trust, and all others pay cash." If this English professor thinks I sound like that, maybe I might have a chance. Writing might be something that I can do
sure.
because I'd always liked it, but like I said, I never thought it was good enough for anybody to read. So I thought, well, I'll give it a try. And in 2005, I self-published uh, a, a book of my own.
Okay.
Uh, at the time, it was called Down by the River. Now it's called. I say now it's called because it's been after a while, and a publisher actually picked it up and renamed it and re-edited it and put it out. Now it's called Death Rides the Red River. Um, but it was a combination of westerns, which I like, and werewolves, which also are a favorite of mine.
Sure.
And they put out that book, and it did pretty well. So I decided I was working so much that I really didn't give a lot of attention to writing. It took me 6 years to put out the next book.
Wow.
Uh, and
Well,
it was a collection of short stories, and I did that in 2011, and it was actually 2019 before I actually started writing full time
okay.
after I retired.
Sure.
I've been writing full time since 2019.
Wow. That's great. So why don't you tell us about a couple of your books, and just, sort of the lore in them. And once we sort of hear a little bit about it, I want to hear from you what your process is for researching these books.
Yeah, actually, I have a series of it's 7 books long now. As I said, I liked the werewolf stories when I was young. Lon Chaney Jr. and the Werewolf was, to me, the greatest movie that ever was. Maybe not so much now, but at the time it was. And so I was interested in that. And like I said, the first book I did was werewolves and cowboys and Indians and werewolves. Uh, and But then I got interested in basically the Cajun version of the werewolf, which is called the Rougarou. And again, it's a creature that is said to haunt the bayous and the swamps around New Orleans and south of New Orleans. And I got involved with researching that uh, and decided I really liked that and kind of went with that story. Um, at the same time, I was also actually researching Bigfoot.
Okay.
I'd run into that growing up in far northern California. But at the time I began writing the Rougarou book. I was also living in Idaho, and I'd been in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho for a while, and I began to pick up some stories of Bigfoot as well. So I when I finished writing the book about the Rougarou, and I a lot of that study was again stuff that I picked up online and some that I uh, received from people who were like Facebook friends. I had a lot of Facebook friends from Louisiana, so I picked up a lot of that from that. Uh, and I also, at the same time, was doing research on Bigfoot uh, from stories that I was getting uh, from mostly from Western Washington, Eastern Idaho, that area, and also the Olympic Peninsula, which where I lived for a while while I was working in Washington. I lived out on the Olympic Peninsula and around the Puget Sound area.
Okay.
So I picked up a lot of stories from there, and those things uh, I just kind of incorporated into my books.
Mhm.
I write fiction, and I don't really I tell people I don't really write historical fiction, but kind of in a way I do because I pick up things from folklore of the area, and I like to pick up those things and then incorporate those in my stories.
Mhm.
Uh, for example, the Bigfoot story, the first Bigfoot story that I wrote, uh, took place. It's about a veteran returning home from World War I. Of course,
Okay.
veterans were near to my heart, and the Bigfoot stories were there. And what I did in that one was incorporate the research that I did on the Native American tribes around the Puget Sound area, Olympic Peninsula area. I took some of their stories that they had told, and then added some things that people had told me, uh, and put those into a story and incorporated those.
Now, with both the Rougarou and also Bigfoot, I have the same question with both of them. Like
Okay.
for the Rougarou, what is the difference between like that particular kind of werewolf and what we would think of as like the classic werewolf?
Yeah, there are some differences between the two. Yes, you can become a Rougarou if you were bitten by a Rougarou and you happen to be their last victim. You could become a Rougarou. But one of the things that plays into my stories is that you can become a Rougarou because someone puts a curse on you.
Okay, interesting.
And that's some of the voodoo, and one of the characters in my Rougarou books, that's what happened to her, is that the voodoo queen of New Orleans put a curse upon her,
Okay.
and so she's a Rougarou now. Uh, and one of the other ways that you can, and again, this is kind of goes with the area, is that you can become a Rougarou if you break Lent 7 years in a row.
Oh, interesting.
Whether you mean to or not, if you break Lent 7 years in a row, you can be turned into a Rougarou,
Wow.
and that was kind of part of the carryover from France to Canada to Louisiana. There was that religious aspect uh, to the Rougarou.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, in France, in the Middle Ages, sort of the same thing. We kind of see witch trials go on. There were Rougarou trials. Well, of course, they weren't called the Rougarou in France. They were called a Loup-garou.
Okay.
The name Rougarou came. from the blend of French Canadian and Cree Indians
Oh,
is
fascinating.
where the word came from. But in France, before that, there were loup-garou trials, and it was kind of used in the same way. Kids were told if you don't go to bed, if you don't mind your parents, the loup-garou will get you.
Yeah, monsters have been used to keep kids in line for a long time.
Yeah. So that's kind of where some of that started. Like I said, it migrated to the New World in French Canada, and then on to Louisiana when it went there.
Okay. Very interesting. Now, with the Bigfoot, and I don't know a lot about Bigfoot stories. Are there differences, if like regional differences or anything like
Yeah,
that?
there are to what little bit of research. I first got interested. It was like 1972. Um, just before I went into the service, I happened to visit a place in Northern California that's called the Trees of Mystery,
Okay.
which is California redwoods and different. They're just an interesting thing about the redwoods there. But they had in their bookstore, they had a whole table that was dedicated to Bigfoot, and I'd never heard of Bigfoot before.
Okay.
And I got to reading and looking over those things, and they had some still frames you know, from the Roger Patterson film, and some footprints, molds of footprints that they'd taken. And I kind of let that go until I was back there in Washington and Idaho later, and people were telling me stories about things that had happened. But there are some differences. Actually, where I live in Alabama right now, there's a Bigfoot is here. There's some stories, but one of the I guess different things from this area is around this area in Alabama they have something called the white thing.
The White Fang?
White thing, yeah. Instead of thing, it's Thang
Oh,
because
the white, oh, the
that's the way they
white
say
fang.
it.
It's the fang.
White thing, uh, which is basically is a Bigfoot,
Okay.
but they're white.
Okay.
They're not the brown or the dark colors from the Pacific Northwest. They're the one that happens to be around here is white.
See, I would think that it would be somewhere like way north where it's, snowy and icy most of the year.
Yeah, yeah,
Because,
you would think so.
yeah, you'd think it
Yeah,
would be out in a lush environment like that.
I haven't done anything with it, but there is one now. There is one in Louisiana, sort of north and east of New Orleans, that's called the Honey Island monster,
Okay.
which is again is basically a Bigfoot type creature that lives in that area,
Okay.
sort of on the Louisiana Mississippi border, right in there.
Now, you said that you've been talking to people who have had sightings, right?
Right.
Okay. So how do you track down people? Is it just people who happen to be in a certain area that you were living in, or are there other ways that you find folks?
Uh, for the most part, it's people that I just happen to run into where I'm living at.
Okay.
I've had people tell me, "How can you live in these areas where you've lived and you've never seen a Bigfoot?" Uh, I don't have an answer to that.
That's
But
tragic.
yeah, a lot of things were those that I encountered. I've been to a few Bigfoot festivals, and one that they have just outside Portland. A big part of the festival is they have a sort of an open stage,
Okay.
and if you have had a Bigfoot encounter, you're welcome to get up on that stage and tell about it.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I've got some from there. Some from people were from people that I actually knew. There's one, and I don't know if it's in that first story in tracks, but as they were the two sisters that I met, they were younger at the time, and they were out camping with their parents, and they had a something that happened where they were sleeping in a trailer that was hitched to a pickup truck, and they lay down to go to sleep. Suddenly, the whole trailer tipped, uh, and they were kind of thrown about the trailer. The parents were sleeping in the back of the truck in the camper, and they were tipped the other way. And it's like something giant stepped on the hitch in between the truck and the trailer.
Okay.
They didn't see anything, but it's like what could do that? And that I mean, they didn't say it was a Bigfoot. They just said, this is what happened to us. What it was, we don't know, but this is what happened. But
Very,
and I kind of picked some of that up. I also go to a Bigfoot festival in Mena, Arkansas,
okay.
every year, and they do have, as part of their festival, have a night Bigfoot hunt
Oh, that's great.
where they go out into the woods. I haven't seen it. I've been on the hunt, but I haven't seen anything there. And I do that with some of the Bigfoot groups that I'm in contact with on Facebook. I think it was 2 springs ago. I went out with a Bigfoot hunting group here in Alabama,
Okay.
and spent a weekend out in the woods in the Talladega National Forest with them, which was quite interesting. But again, they tell me stories, and for the most part, these are very credible people, and a lot of the things they tell me, it's like, well, it's not out of the realm of possibility. So, I kind of incorporate that into what I do.
Interesting. So, are there like differences, like personality differences between Bigfoots in different areas, or is it all just the whole like shy, elusive, and you only catch a glimpse?
I think it might be. Some of the things that I've read online depict the Bigfoot as very violent, and if you see it in the movies, some of the movies that I watch on TV, again, the Bigfoot is very violent. He's very much a threat to people. Um, but a lot of the places that I've been to, uh, he's not seen as a threat to people.
Okay.
Of course, most of the people that I've heard their stories, people that say they've actually seen one, they didn't stick around to find out if he was a threat.
Ah, okay.
As soon as they saw whatever they saw, they got out of there.
Do you think that's one of the reasons why we have never gotten a really decent photo of a Bigfoot?
Yeah, I think that's a part of it. I know one objection is, well, why haven't we found a dead body?
Hmm.
Yet? Why haven't we run across one? And one very credible Bigfoot researcher that I've read there some statistics that he put out. He lives in Oregon along the Columbia River, and he said it's estimated in Oregon where he lives, there are 30,000 bears.
Mm.
Last year, we discovered 3 dead bodies. And so he said, if you carry that over into thinking about Bigfoot, probably there's not as many Bigfoot as bears. So the fact that we don't find a body is not necessarily doesn't mean that they're not there.
Hmm.
And then again, a lot of animals, when they know they're dying, if they know they're dying, they go off someplace to hide and die.
Yeah,
Uh, and so it's like that there Bigfoot could be out there and we wouldn't find it. It makes sense in a way that we wouldn't find a body.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And there's a lot of areas that are very remote.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
now, is there a difference between Bigfoot and a Yeti?
Um, I've read some information. They sound a lot alike
Hmm.
when you read the stories about them. I have seen some photographs that are supposed to be taken of footprints, and the Yeti has one less toe
Okay.
than the Bigfoot.
Okay.
Um, yeah, that's one thing that people say. How close are they? Related.
How many
That's the one thing that kind of shows that.
how many toes does a Bigfoot have?
A Bigfoot has five
Okay.
generally, and the Yeti has three or four, depending on how you see it.
Interesting.
Um, One interesting thing about the Bigfoot, and it's very convincing to me, is that Bigfoot prints and some of the Bigfoot movies that have been taken have been studied. This fella, he's a professor at Idaho State. He studies anthropology, primate anthropology, with kind of an emphasis on how they get around,
Okay.
on anatomy.
Hmm.
And his review of say the Patterson film, and the way that the muscle groups move in the film, the way the foot moves, this is not something human. It's very definitely a separate thing. And people have tried to fool him. They've made their own tracks and brought him to him, and immediately said, no, this is a fake.
That's awesome.
Because again, you look at the tracks that he has a huge collection of molds of tracks and things. If you look at again, the scientific anatomy of the foot, how it moves, how it works in these tracks, you know, he right away he can pick out a fake. This is not real. It doesn't move like that.
Okay.
It's very interesting. And I've been to a couple of his lectures. Very very interesting.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting. Now, are Bigfoots just found in North America, or do we find them other places as well?
Actually, it's kind of found. It seems to be all over the world. I've read some stories, and I did this sort of in preparation for my very first Rougarou book. I was doing some research because my protagonist in that book was a Vietnam veteran.
Oh, okay.
So I did some reading, and I wanted him to have sort of a cryptid supernatural contact before he ran into the Rougarou.
Okay.
And so I was doing some research and found a similar creature in Southeast Asia. So
Yeah. Well,
yeah, it is kind of, as near as I can tell. I mean, I haven't read any stories from Europe or Africa. Uh, Again, Southeast Asia, I have read those um, all over North America.
I'm pretty sure there's an Irish werewolf.
There
Um,
is.
yeah, yeah,
Actually, I'm incorporating the Irish werewolf in my latest book,
yeah. Okay.
because one difference with the Irish werewolf is the Irish werewolf is kind of guardians of children,
Oh, interesting.
and the couple who are protagonists of my Moon series
Hmm.
have recently had children.
Okay. Okay.
Often they leave the children on pursuit of a Rougarou or the Latish, which this book they're on. Um, I've introduced a new Irish nanny who happens to be a werewolf, an Irish werewolf, who is going to be guardian of their children.
Well, that's really interesting because I know in the UK there's lots of black dog
Right.
lore,
Yes.
and the the black shuck is seen as a protective kind of figure in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it'll like if someone is walking at night and there's people around that are have ill intent and they're gonna rob them or kill them or whatever, that's when the black shuck will appear and walk alongside, and and the whole Padfoot thing.
Yeah,
So I think that that's interesting that the Irish werewolf is similarly protective.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a sort of a new thing that I ran across, like I said, researching for this latest book was found that I didn't plan that for the book, but
Mhm.
when I ran across it, I thought, oh yeah, this has got to be in there.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I was going to actually design a game around that character, and I just never got around to that particular story. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit. Oh, I wanted to ask you about the festivals. So you said that there was this open mic and at the one festival, and that there are hunts at night. But what else? What does one do at a Bigfoot festival?
Um, well, of course, I spent a lot of time trying to sell books,
Sure,
but for people that that go to Bigfoot festivals, I mean, they go there. Of course, there are the vendors, so they're booksellers like me.
sure.
Um, I'm one of the few that sells fiction. Nonfiction sells better, of course. Um, Generally, most of them have some kind of person is sort of an expert in their field.
Okay,
One of the ones that I went to, there was a fellow there. He was teaching people that were there about the latest means of casting footprints.
okay,
He was talking about that. Another one that I went to, there was an anthropology professor from a neighboring state college, and he was a lot of what he was talking about was Native American stories and how those relate to uh, modern Bigfoot encounters or stories about Bigfoot, encounters.
uh-huh.
Um, like I said, the one I went to in Oregon, just outside of Portland, that's the only one I can think of right off that had the open mic
Hmm.
for people to get up and tell their stories. Although that happens, even in the ones where they may not have an open mic to do it. People walk around, they go from vendor to vendor, or people that are there and they're telling stories.
Uh-huh.
Um, the last one I went to back in September, there was a group there. They were called Sisters of the Moon,
Okay,
and they were telling about Bigfoot encounters. And they just have basically sessions where people sit around. And again, some of the ones that I've been to have like a campfire at night,
okay.
and people sit around the campfire and they tell their stories.
Sure, sure. Well, it makes a lot of sense to me that the nonfiction is a better seller because probably most people that are going have either had an encounter or they're true believers.
Right, right, yes, absolutely.
So I guess that leads me to the question, you've never seen a Bigfoot. Are
Right.
you a true believer?
Um, I guess I would have to say yes, because while I've never seen one, I lean more in favor of the evidence for
Okay.
than evidence against. Uh,
What's the most convincing evidence that you've seen that
the most convincing evidence I think that I've ever seen is well, well, I maybe the best one, I guess. I there mostly it's the stories that people tell and the people who tell them. Uh, in that there's no fame, there's no money, there's nothing involved in maybe ridicule, if anything, for
sure.
telling their stories. I actually ran into a fella in a coffee shop here in Alabama a couple of years ago, and I actually had on a T-shirt, a Bigfoot T-shirt, and he walked up and he asked me, "Do you think Bigfoot is real?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think so." And he said, "Well, I don't think Bigfoot's real, but I do believe these footprints, and he showed me a picture that he'd taken of footprints in the mud outside his back porch, with a ruler alongside them to give scale. And I was like, my thought was, how do you not believe when you see something like that, outside your very own door?
Uh-huh.
Uh, but yeah, he might have been kidding me a bit, but yeah, that was probably the most convincing evidence. I tell people I haven't seen a Bigfoot, but like I said, I grew up in Northern California, and I did have an experience where I was out deer hunting
Okay.
with a friend of mine. We were both well armed. We happened to meet up together in a clearing, and we had been there for a short time. And again, I hear Bigfoot people that actually have encounters tell us that suddenly everything was quiet, and this creepy feeling came over them that they didn't know what it was, couldn't explain it. Excuse me. But they just felt they had to get out of there.
Okay.
And that did happen to the two of us. Like I said, we were well armed. The sun was going down. Um, we didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything, but we did both had the same kind of creepy feeling. So, well, maybe it was a bear.
Mm.
And it was like, I don't think so, because we might have welcomed a bear showing up, because we wouldn't mind killing a bear
Sure.
if that was the case. Not that necessarily we were out hunting them, but if one showed up and it seemed to be a danger, we would have killed it,
Yeah.
and we
Well.
were we were well able to kill it. But this feeling was just so creepy. We thought, you know what? Let's get out of here,
Mm-hmm.
and we did, and we never went back to that place either.
Interesting. Have you ever had any other kind of supernatural encounters?
I actually did, as a pastor of a church.
Okay.
I took a church in southern Oklahoma one time, and when I went there to sort of get familiar with it, there was a very creepy feeling about it.
Okay.
And my wife at the time said, there's something creepy here.
Interesting.
And the pastors that were leaving agreed there was something creepy about and strange about the whole building. And I'd been there a while, and my daughter happened to be in the sanctuary of the church playing a piano one day, and suddenly it was the middle of summer in southern Oklahoma, which is pretty warm anyways. All the heaters came on. It got so hot in there she couldn't stand it. She got out. But we hadn't been there long, and we lived actually on the back of the church building.
Okay.
There was a church building, then there was a like a big kitchen and hall where they had dinners and things. And then we lived in an apartment on the back of that.
Okay.
But to get to like where our freezer, where our freezer was, where we kept things, you had to go into this room in between the church and our apartment.
Okay.
And the light switch was on the furthest wall from the apartment. And my family would not go into that room by themselves. Nobody would go in that room by themselves.
Really? It was just a bad feeling?
It was yes, a very bad feeling, and it seemed to get worse the longer that we were there. If I didn't let it bother me, but we'd been there about 6 months, and I actually moved the coffee maker from out of that kitchen into my office, so I didn't have to be in that kitchen to make coffee
Yeah.
or walk in there to get another cup of coffee. Uh, Not long after that, I was actually praying in the church, and I call it a demon or an evil spirit. It was a black cloud. If you've ever seen the movie Ghost,
Yeah.
and you see the black things that are sort of misty looking, that come out of nowhere and they take people away,
Yes. Yeah.
that's what it looked like.
Oh, that's so
That
weird.
came through this wall, and it just kind of looked at me, and it looked I could tell the way it was moving around and the changes in the color that sort of a face was appearing. Uh, and I basically I commanded it to leave. I felt the wind pass by me, and the doors at the back of the church rattled like something hit them.
Oh.
And that afternoon, uh, my wife asked me, said, and where she got that? She said, "Is it gone?" I said, "Is what gone?" I said, "Whatever's in there, because I don't feel it."
Oh, wow.
Um, like I said, and actually that it was repeated about a week later. The same kind of thing happened, and it's like, yeah. After that, like I said, people would go through there. They. I didn't hear any more stories about feeling creepy.
Were there any stories about anything weird that had happened in the church or in that room?
Yeah, there were a few, not necessarily for that room, but just some stories about sort of weird behavior and things from people who then left there, and I don't know. I feel like it was kind of that the spirits were welcome there, and then once welcome there, they wouldn't leave.
Okay.
Not that they. I was back there in what October. No, November. November. I was back there in November, and I drove by the building. It's no longer a church,
Oh,
but I really wanted to go ask the people if they had encountered anything, but it was too late by the time we went by there, and they weren't open.
oh,
It's what is it, medical supply store now.
okay.
But yeah, I didn't get the opportunity to do that. I really wanted that opportunity, but I didn't.
Now, have you heard any like personal stories? I know you said that most people, if they encounter a Bigfoot, they get out of there. But
Right.
have you heard any stories of people who have stayed and observed or even interacted?
Yeah, I've heard a few. I've heard more than one of that took place like with hunters up in a tree stand, and
That
Bigfoot
makes
would
sense.
would pass underneath, maybe even know that they were there, and look up at them, and they realized they were there, but then they passed on. The Bigfoot passed on out of there. They didn't run, but kind of Bigfoot left the area.
Okay. So, of all the stories that you've written, do you have a favorite? I know that's an unfair question to ask an author. Can you pick your favorite
Um,
child?
as far as the writing goes, I do. It's called Bayou Moon,
Okay.
which was the first Rougarou story that I wrote.
Okay.
Uh, I think it's my best writings. People disagree with me. I think it's my best told story, but uh, I was actually talking to I was on a podcast, and I was talking about the Moon books, and I told these people, Blood Moon, which is the second one in that series. I said that was trash. That was a terrible book. I don't like. And they said, "You got to be kidding me, right?" I said, "No, no, it's not anywhere near as good." I said, "But that's the one that got all the good reviews."
I guess we're always our own worst critic, right?
Yeah, so yeah, there's that. I've got one that I put out last year. It's and it's really nothing to do with any dress. It's a fantasy book, and it's the first fantasy that I ever wrote. Uh, but I had this idea for years. Basically, I had a picture in my mind of the opening scene of this story,
Hmm.
and it was this half-human kind of creature that was sort of flying, moving through the trees towards the city.
Hmm.
And I sat down a couple of times to try and write it, no luck. at all. And finally, I just gave up. I didn't forget it, but I just gave up about it. And one day, my grandson, he was I think he's what 21 now, but he was in like third grade at the time, and he decided he wanted to write a story like Grandpa does. Um, and I came home one day, and there was a story on my desk that he wrote in class.
Okay.
I honestly don't think that's what he was supposed to be doing in class at the time, but there was a story on my desk, and I read that story, and it was pretty simple. But I mean, you know, third grader. Uh, and I read that story, and I said, "This is the rest of that book." And so, that one kind of holds a special place.
Mm-hmm.
I did write the book. I wrote the book. I sent it to a publishing company. They were going to publish it. Um, they didn't right away, and the publishing company went out of business.
Oh,
Um, and so we just published it last year. It's
okay.
been probably 10 years since I wrote it. Um, but we finally published it last year. Of course, the grandson now says, "Do I get part of the royalties?" Well, I don't know about that. Uh,
Well, good for him for trying.
yeah, oh yeah.
It's the right instinct there. Okay, so if people are looking for your books, how can they find them?
The very best place to find them is on my publisher's website. It's
Also,
houseofhonorbooks.com. They're on Amazon. If you search my name, you'll find them. Um, on the publisher's website, they're all on there. Plus, there's some other great books on there that other authors from the publishing company have written. The good thing about their website is that there's a sample from the audiobooks. Most all of my books have been made into audiobooks,
oh,
and
okay.
there's a sample you can go on and you can listen to. Uh, you know, uh, about a 5 minute bit of each book.
Nice. And how do people find out more about you?
Um, Actually, I have my own website. It's jacklafountainauthor.com, and I actually I write a blog on there, and it's called No Jack.
I like that.
I was telling, well, everybody ought to know Jack, but yeah. So I write on there, and and then I tell people too, for the most part, if you really want, kind of want to know what I'm like, if you read my books, there I am.
Nice.
Because there's a good part of me that goes into all of the characters, the good ones and the bad ones. There's a bit of me probably in all of them.
Okay. All right. That's a very interesting perspective on that. I like that. So before I let you go, is there anything else you'd like to share with listeners? Any other final thoughts?
Uh, well, no, yeah, like I said, you can find my books there. If you happen to be in the Pensacola area at the end of March, I'm going to be reading from my newest book at a function it's called Books by the Bay.
Okay.
It takes place in Pensacola on the last weekend of March, and I'm going to be reading from my books there.
Nice.
Uh, if that's a long ways from you, in June, I go to a book festival called Wild Deadwood Reads in Deadwood, South Dakota.
Okay.
That takes place, and it's a great vacation, if and that's what I use it for a lot. It's Wild Bill Hickok weekend,
Oh, fun.
and so there's free concerts. There's the town is just wide open, and it's a great place to go. And they have a book festival there at the lodge in Deadwood, and it's called Wild Deadwood Reads. And usually I usually read there, and I will be reading there this year on Friday night, and then they have the big book fair on Saturday. Come out and meet authors, and it looks like this year is going to be huge. It started out basically as a romance festival for romance writers.
Okay.
Uh, I broke into it the first year they allowed. writers other than romance writers to be. I was there, and strangely enough, there were two men in the room. This this huge auditorium of authors. There were two men there. This year, I think there's about 20 guys that are going to be there. Besides, and then there are great romance stories, of course, which my editor likes to go along. Not only to get the romance books,
Mhm.
but she likes that the cover models
Well,
uh,
understandably.
are sort of the MCs of the whole book signing festival, which is a great
That's
thing.
great.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we get around. I try to advertise on my Facebook page, which is again author Jack LaFountain on Facebook. Let you know where I'm going to be. We try to get out and go as many places as we can across the country. We'll
That's
be in
great.
Nashville on the first weekend in March.
Any plans for Chicago?
Uh, Not yet, but I'm hoping that will happen. We have uh, House of Honor Books has two authors from Illinois.
Okay.
And so one's from Aurora.
Okay.
So
That's
we'd like to, like to get up in that area. Yeah.
yeah, that's sort of kind of close to where I am. There's a
Yeah.
it's maybe an hour. And when you
Yes.
live in
Yeah, she's a
Chicago,
bit out of Chicago, but
yeah. Well, it's Aurora's like the second biggest city in the state.
oh, okay.
So, yeah. But yeah, in Chicago, an hour is not very far. So,
Well, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, Huntsville is not nearly as big as Chicago and takes me a half hour to get across.
well, thank you very much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And, just look for those books, everybody.
Oh, you bet. Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for having me.
Sure.
As always, thanks for listening to Folkloring. If you liked what you heard, please consider leaving a rating and review. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. If you have any questions or comments or would like to suggest a topic for a future episode, please email us at folkloringpod@gmail.com or message us on Facebook or Instagram. Other places you can find me are at the Folklore Podcast as the theater, film, and storytellers correspondent, or creating folklore-inspired games at madmenandheroes.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and keep the traditions alive. And I hope that wherever you are, folklore is making your life more magical.